Hello there, it's Mr. Wood here. This is our second video in our series on Judaism, the practices. This is all about getting you ready for your GCSE exam, all about Judaism. This is the second video in the practices playlist, and it's all about Kashrut, the dietary laws in Judaism. Your need to know today is very simple. You need to know there are certain foods that Jews can eat, they're called kosher, and there are certain foods that Jews cannot eat, and these are called treyfah. These rules don't just apply to the food themselves, but how they are prepared. So what are your favourite foods? Are there some foods that you just do not eat at all? Are there some foods that you eat even though you don't really like them? Now in Judaism, there's a whole area of the halakha, of the Jewish law, which applies to dietary needs and what you're supposed to do with what you eat and how you eat it. And it's called Kashrut. According to the Kashrut rules, generally you can divide things into two groups. There's stuff you can eat, which is your kosher food, and there's stuff that you can't eat, which is treyfah. Kosher means clean. It's food that's clean and it's okay and it's acceptable to eat. Treyfah comes from a word meaning torn, ripped away, you could imagine. And that's food that Jews are not permitted to eat. If we look to the Bible, if we look to the Torah to find out where these rules come from, this aspect of Jewish law, we would find food laws primarily in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. And of course, these are then exemplified more in the Talmud and further discussions. And if you want to hear more about that, then please do look at the video on halakha, the Jewish law, and where that can be found. I thought it'd be helpful today to look at the original text and see what it says. And the plan here is to highlight a few bits and talk about a few bits together. So this is the reference here from the book of Deuteronomy. If I get my pen ready, let's go through it together. Now you might actually want to pause it for yourself here, have a look at it and then unpause it so that you're not just taking what I have to say about it. Maybe have a look for yourself. We'll jump in though. So it starts here with do not eat any detestable thing, and actually in the Hebrew there, that's very similar to that word there I've introduced to you today. If you hadn't heard it before, that's treyfah, this idea of being torn, ripped away. It's not for you, it's detestable. There are animals you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. You can eat any animal that has a divided hoof and that chews the cud, that ruminates. So any animal that does those two things that are visible, you can eat those animals. However, of those that chew the cud or that have a divided hoof, you may not eat. You may not eat the camel, the hare, or the hyrax, because although they chew the cud, they do not have a divided hoof. They are ceremonially unclean for you. The pig is also unclean. Although it has a divided hoof, it does not chew the cud. Now with a pig, it goes even further. You're not to eat their meat or touch their carcasses. Extra rules there for the pig. Of all the creatures living in the water, you can eat any that have fins or scales. But anything that does not have fins or scales, you may not eat. For you, it is unclean. So something maybe that looks a bit like this would be unclean. You can eat any clean bird, but these you may not eat: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, the black kite, or any kind of falcon, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, or any kind of hawk: the little owl, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the cormorant, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. All flying insects are unclean to you. Do not eat them. But any winged creature that is clean, you may eat. Do not eat anything you find already dead. You may give it to the foreigner residing in any of your towns, and they may eat it, or you may sell it to any other foreigner. But you are a people holy to the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So you can see here there's some things that are acceptable, animals that you may eat. And that word again there is kosher, clean, and there's things that cannot be eaten. And it's very specific about what can and what cannot be eaten. Let's pause the video here. Let's see what you've taken in so far. Have a go at these questions, and then when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll look at some answers. So let's check your understanding. I might even write a few things on. What does kosher mean? It means clean. What word is used for foods that are forbidden to eat is treyfah. Why might it be said that the rules against a pig are the strongest? And I don't know if you had to rewind or have a look at the passage, but it's to do with not just eating it, but also touching the skin. 3 animals that Jews can eat. So there's a whole bunch of things there, but if you remember, it's anything that both has a cleft hoof, a split hoof, and chews the cud, which would include the cow, lamb, chicken. And what about things that can't be eaten? Well, you might have seen there the camel. We've already got the pig, so we'll leave that one out. There's some birds of prey in there, like the vulture and the red kite. 2 things that are found on water-based creatures that Jews are allowed to eat. We're looking for fins and scales. And then your extension there was to think, well, how do Orthodox Jews and Reform Jews, how would they interpret the Kashrut laws? And I'm sure you've seen previous videos on the difference between the two, but generally, Orthodox Jews are going to take them as literally as possible and very strict with what it says in the original scripture, in the original teaching, whereas Reform Jews are likely to adapt the teaching to fit their culture, so they might be more likely to eat some of those things that were said to be treyfah or detestable long ago. I wonder if you noticed the last words in that extract from Deuteronomy that we just looked at. It said, "Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk." Now you might have thought that's a bit of an obscure teaching, and interestingly, this teaching appears 3 times throughout the Torah. And this is not controversial, but a much debated piece of scripture. And when you read the Talmud, you'll see there's a lot of discussion about how this should be interpreted. Now, we would all, I'm sure, take it literally. It would be a very cruel thing, I think, to cook a young goat in its mother's milk. But what does it mean for Jews today? And as we look back to that question we looked at in the last video, what does God require of us? Now, some Jews have taken this to mean this. Now, if we start by looking at a couple of things before we jump into this, one would be a glass of milk. Now, would a glass of milk be kosher or treyfah? It would be kosher. It would be absolutely acceptable and clean to drink a glass of milk. What about a hamburger? Well, again, that would be kosher. That would be clean. That would be completely acceptable to eat. However, many Jews take this teaching and interpret it to mean that this, for example, a glass of milk with a hamburger would be treyfah. It would not be acceptable to eat them and drink them both together, because many Jews interpret this to mean you shouldn't have dairy and meat in the same meal. For some Jews, they wouldn't eat them like at the same time. For some Jews, they'd have a set amount of time between the two. If they'd had some milk, they might wait a while longer before they have the meat. And there's lots of different reasons for why this might be. Many people have said that it was a pagan practice at the time, a non-Jewish practice, an idolatrous practice, to do this ritual in order to bring blessings upon your tribe. And God was saying to his people, don't do that. That's not something that I want you to do. It might be because it was just a very cruel thing to do and shows you about being kind. It would be a very cruel thing to do this to a kid, to a goat. And also some Jews have just mentioned that it can be very difficult to digest both milk and meat in the same meal. But for Jews, it's something some Jews take very seriously. And in some Jewish kitchens, you'll find that there is complete separation between the meat section and the milk section, so the two don't meet each other. As well as advising Jews what they can and can't eat, the Kashrut rules also apply to how that food must be prepared. We've spoken already about meat and milk in the kitchen and how those two have to be completely separated and never cooked at the same time or consumed at the same time. But also, when Jews go to buy their meat, they need to make sure it's kosher meat that's been slaughtered by a shoshet, a Jewish trained butcher. Now, part of the ritual slaughter involves cutting a deep cut across the throat, again by the trained butcher, and the blood being drained very, very quickly. This is seen as one of the most humane ways to kill animals. What they also do is they make sure that all of the blood is taken from the animals after they've killed it like this. It's drained and then salted to get as much blood out as possible, because there's a teaching in Scripture in Leviticus that the blood is the life of the animal. And so Jews try to avoid eating blood at all costs. So why do the Jews have these rules? Why did God give the Israelites the Kashrut rules? Well, there's lots of different reasons why, and lots of different rabbis and Jews have speculated about this over the centuries. One of them is simply it's part of the covenant. Part of the covenant with Moses involves what can and can't be eaten. It's part of the mitzvot. And again, I recommend, if you're not familiar with that, do go and watch the video on all about the 613 rules given to Moses by God. Another reason is that it's hygienic. It's just healthy, safe food to eat. If you think about like pork, if you don't cook it properly, it's very dangerous. We've spoken about milk and dairy being hard to digest. Also, they're not Jews aren't supposed to eat shellfish. And if you look at where Israel is, there's definitely certain parts where it would be very difficult to keep shellfish safe to eat if they were going to try and keep hold of it for a while. So these rules in place maybe to help with hygiene. Part of it is to keep the Jews holy, to keep them separate from other tribes back in the day, that they were called to be a separate people. And so these food rules, by not preparing food and eating with people with the same rules, will keep them as a separate group. And another rule is it shows them discipline as well. And it teaches them it's important sometimes to hold back and say no to things. And that will then give them good strength of will in other aspects of their life as well. There's other things as well. It's been speculated, like when they talk about pigs, they lie on their back sometimes and they show that they've got a split hoof. They've got a cleaved hoof, but they don't, of course, chew the cud. And there's a lesson in there about who you can trust and how you can't trust them, and making good decisions with people that you spend time with. So if you want to pause here, final questions there, have a go at these, and then push play when you're ready to see the answers. All right, let's check your understanding. So why do many Jews not eat dairy and milk at the same time? Because in the scripture it says, do not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. What is the term used for a qualified kosher butcher? I'll write that one in here for you. The term is a shoshet. Why is it forbidden to eat blood? Because it's seen that the life of the animal is in the blood. 2 reasons why Jews follow the dietary laws. You might say it gives them discipline, and it's because they're holy, they're separate, and they're called to do things differently to other people. And then I don't know if you had a go at that, but maybe you had a go at planning a 4-course meal that would be kosher for Jews. That brings us to the end of this lesson, so let's visit our need to know one final time. You need to know there are certain foods that Jews can eat, and these are kosher, and there are some that are forbidden, and these are treyfah. This not only applies to the food themselves, but how the food is prepared. Catch you next time.